It is right at 12:30, so we will give everybody a second to jump on. I have no idea how many folks are going to be able to make this rescheduled call. We appreciate everybody's understanding about our canceling. Our team was in no shape to present post Dobbs v. Jackson ruling, so appreciate that everybody was flexible there. Hi, Myra.
Audio. I know it takes a second for my audio to get there when it comes to Zoom. I don't know if you guys can hear me now.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, wonderful. I don't know why my computer doesn't like it when it's Zoom. It just takes a long time to get there, but good morning. Happy to be here. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Good morning.
Morning, everybody. The crew is slowly coming on here, so.
It's a summer Friday. I know it can be hard sometimes.
Ruth. And I'm in the midst of scheduling a December board meeting, which just feels bizarre. Can I say that? Like just bizarre.
Anything past August feels weird to me, and like September is really not that far away, but it feels like rude to even say that word.
Completely. Like, wasn't it just 5 minutes ago, January? I woke up this morning, it was January, I swear.
Well, we'll be talking end of the year fundraising next month and fundraising Friday. So 'tis that time of year for us fundraisers. All right, we'll give everybody one more minute and then dive in. All right, Polly, whenever you want to start.
You have to enable me to share my screen.
Advanced sharing options. All participants. Right now. Polly, is it working for you?
All right. Does it look good now?
Yep.
All right.
All right, guys, welcome to part 2 of the nonprofit industrial complex. We talked a month ago now about how to navigate it as a practitioner, and today we want to get into the nitty-gritty conversation of where to challenge the complex, where it upholds inequity, and to critically examine our roles in it. This is meant to be serious discussion, not a lot of presentation. So definitely this is a safe space. Bring your questions to the table, bring your conundrums to the table, bring where you think this is hooey and we're nuts for talking about it to the table. All of that is up for discussion. Thank you again to everyone for the flexibility when we were scheduled to do this session. It was the Dobbs v. Jackson ruling had just come down, and I can't speak for anybody else's team, but mine was in no shape to do a presentation and facilitate a conversation. And we were sort of in a rapid response mode. If we do have any abortion care provider networks or reproductive justice groups on the phone, we did launch in response to that a pro bono rapid response RevGen effort. What we found with our groups that we worked with who got a lot of donors in summer 2020 because of the uprisings for racial justice, many of them did not retain those donors because they didn't react quick enough. They didn't have a plan in place. And we know that there's a lot of small dollar donor money flowing into the reproductive rights space right now. And we really want to make sure that the groups that are seeing any kind of increase in their fundraising from that, please reach out, or if you have friends in your network that are in those spaces, tell them to reach out to us. We have mobilized our fundraiser friends to provide strategic assistance, and we're working with our funders to try to get even more funded and try to put grants their way. So definitely holler if anybody is interested in that. All right, Polly, let's do it. Dude, you got control of the slides. I'm not in the driver's seat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is not allowing me to move slides.
hit
All right,
your
there we
down
go.
arrow. Yeah, all right. Okay, so for those of us who are new to the call, I don't think we have any true newbies. I think everybody's here. You have 3 out of 5 of Progressive Multipliers mighty team on the phone here. Violetta Bermudez, our chief storyteller, is joining us because I will be dropping off before the end of the call so that I can take my niece to get her hair done and graduation pictures taken and her ear pierced because I'm on aunt duty this afternoon. But if you need anything from any of us, we are here. If you want to riff on institutional fundraising, Lisa's happy to connect. If you have any sort of ops and finance questions, Andrea is here. You know, we have found a lot of times that, you know, the groups that we work with just need riff partners and a couple questions answered. So please think of us beyond Fundraising Friday if you just, you know, need somebody to mind meld with. For those of you who have not heard this spiel before, Progressive Multiplier is a funding intermediary, and we exist to help groups start, strengthen, or scale their individual giving and earned revenue programs. We know that most progressive groups have at least 80 or 90% of their money coming from institutional philanthropy, which sort of puts a cap on how big they can get, as well as how much they can be in the driver's seat and accountable to the communities that they serve. So we are all about economic liberation here and making your money and turning your own key. We work with groups in 3 program areas: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. Just about everybody in the progressive movement fits in one of those groups. But if you have a question of if you are eligible for grants with Progressive Multiplier, please let us know. We are happy to chitty chat. We have our current, I think this is actually the last of our co-sponsored groups, where we have both groups from the Resilience Initiative as well as the Leaders Trust on the phone. Resilience Initiative, I believe, is going to be absorbing this as part of, like, I think Leaders Trust is now working with the Resilience Initiative directly to provide this service going forward for the next academic year, starting with our next sessions in July. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Would love to hear where you're from, as well as what role you sit in. We often have development directors, executive directors, sometimes we have organizers. So we just like to know who's in the crew. We do 2 things in our partnership with the Resilience Initiative. We do Fundraising Fridays, so twice a month, and usually the first session of the month is a lecture, and the second session of the month is on the same topic, but a deep dive. And the vote has been to keep that going forward, so we will be continuing that. We have been renewed to do Fundraising Fridays through December, so we're excited about that. Holly, you're going too fast. We will also continue with our one-on-one fundraising coaching. So we are booking those slots, and we are going to be a little bit more flexible. We have typically offered 5 hours, and we're going to do some smaller and larger slots. We've had some groups that have done 3 5-hour projects with us. We have had some groups that just needed 3 hours. But we're really able to help you for free of charge to you with any of those kind of persnickety projects that are on your fundraiser plate, like integrating communication calendars between fundraising and comms, or training your board on how to fundraise, or doing a staffing plan for how to staff fundraising appropriately over multiple years and making that argument up the chain, helping you wireframe your development plan for the year. Any of that stuff is stuff that we can help you with. So please reach out to Michelle at resilienceinitiative.org if you are interested in signing up, and either Polly or I will be all yours for coaching. Now, we still have to plan our curriculum for August through December. So our next sessions are going to be on end of year fundraising, as I mentioned. So this is the time of year we do sort of holidays in July/August here and plan for end of year fundraising. But beyond that, the curriculum is a blank slate. So we are very interested in feedback on what you guys want. So if you want to riff now, throw suggestions in the chat, email Polly directly. Anybody have any thoughts of things that they would really love to see a training on?
Anything coming up for you guys between now and year end that isn't going to be covered in the year end discussion? Something comes up, please share.
All right. So I'm going to hand this over to Polly to see us through, and I can just be color commentary as opposed to being the lead here. We're going to do a quick review of what the nonprofit industrial complex is, and then really go through the 5 elements that make up the complex, and where we have to challenge, and where we have struggled personally with navigation. So we really want this to be robust conversation. And as I say, it's a safe space. These conversations can be sticky and get into things like capitalism and racism and all the things. So don't hesitate to bring your authentic self and listening to the table. I shall shut up now, Polly, all you.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to start off by saying that, like, even though I've presented a gajillion workshops in the past, and I've done this even here, I still get nervous presenting. So it makes me super happy when folks like pipe up and say things and interject and all of that. So I will be very happy to be interrupted. And as Bethany mentioned earlier, this is meant to be a discussion. So there's not lots of slides here. This is really all of a setup to have a conversation. And especially because this is about how do we as individuals try to disrupt this system? What is the system? And how do we navigate it? So before we dive in, since our last session, I know it was a minute and a half ago, I was wondering if anything has come up about the nonprofit industrial complex for you that you'd like to bring up for me to think about as we go through this presentation, or that we want to just sort of dive right in on. Does it feel like it was too long ago? All right, well, hopefully the next couple of slides might help juice the brains a little bit, get those synapses firing. So just real quickly, I wanted to do a quick overview again of what we talked about last time. So in short, what we refer to as a nonprofit industrial complex is a system of relationships. So it's about the state and federal local, state, and federal governments. It's about capitalism. It's about markets. It's about how the foundations as a behemoth in philanthropy impact us. But it's also about how nonprofits behave in the system, and how the businesses that support the system, support nonprofits, also hold it up. It can create the foundation for it to all sort of to get in our way. So, you know, again, quickly, the nonprofit industrial complex has incentivized the type of philanthropy that is very direct service oriented or behavior change and education. So everything on the left side of the screen, it decentivizes the type of things that we do, the advocacy, the direct action, anything that goes to disrupt the status quo. Is not the nonprofit industrial complex is typically not a fan of that. So that's why it's so important for us to be very conscious of what this beast is and how do we navigate through it. So I sort of see as our mandate is we have to identify our responsibilities as practitioners, and then where we can and when we can challenge it. Challenge where it upholds inequity, criticize it when we have the ability, the space, and the privilege to talk truth to power. How do we do that? How do we stand in that gap? That's how I see our role if indeed we want to actively disrupt the nonprofit industrial complex. Does that make sense? Any questions before I dive into the slide that I already sneak peeked you?
Guys, I'd love to know, organization, I didn't see a lot of introductions in the chat. Tell me what kind of organizations do we have on the phone? C3s, C4s? I will call on people, I'm not above that. Right, C3, 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 okay.
Are
Yeah,
any of
the
you guys
C4.
multi-entity?
Yes, Victoria is a C3, C4. So we got a mix here.
Great.
Because as we know, the complex does not like power building most of all. So it is always harder on multi-entity and C4s, but that does not mean that C3s aren't deeply challenged by elements of the complex as well.
Sorry. So that's very good to know. Thank you for asking that question, Bethany. So when we look at these, the 5 areas of how the nonprofit industrial complex affects us, we on a daily basis have figured out how to navigate it, even without really realizing we figured out how to navigate it. Like, we know rules around tax exempt status. We follow the all the IRS rules about like acknowledgement and stuff like that, right? So we already know that there are systems in place that that causes us to follow the rules. Knowing the rules are important also to help us disrupt the rules. So how, for example, when you know the laws that govern you, the tax laws and the things like rules for lobbying, it opens the door and gives you an opportunity to say, like, where are the edges and where can I push? So for example, if you do a lot of direct mail and know the rules around direct mail and you know like the issues with postal rate, it gives you an opportunity to then find opportunities to advocate for changes in the system that are more favorable to your organization and all nonprofit organizations. Another way to disrupt the rules to navigate this is by saying, well, if I can't lobby or electioneer or do really good advocacy work in my C3, I can then create another entity, a C4 or 527 or some other entity that allows me to operate within the rules that are set with me. So you game the system by having multiple entities. You can also use the rules for accounting to help you. You have to navigate them. You have to understand, how to file, how to manage your money. But navigating the rules of finance, the FASB rules, it tells you the joint costs. We've talked about that. We bring it up a lot of like, how do you divide your time so that you can allocate dollars. So for example, all of your fundraising activities, most of the things that you do around fundraising is about education, communications, stuff like that, right? It's not 100% asking. So the rules, or the FASB rules, allows you to look at your activity and say, this part is a fundraising thing and this part is not a fundraising thing. So that's how we navigate within the rules. But then we can challenge it by then advocating.
Chloe, can I ask you to pause?
Yep.
Guys, so how well do you think you know how to navigate within the government parameters that dictate how we roll as nonprofits? Because I think this might be a right place for future sessions if you guys don't feel like you know, what does it mean to work within a multi-entity C3, C4, potentially 527 framework? Or am I really maximizing joint allocation so that I'm not spending C4 dollars on what I could spend C3 on? Or I'm not calling fundraising cost what should be a program cost within my C3 and that kind of stuff. So Kirsten, you think that would, doing a little bit deeper dive might help? And I'd love to hear from folks.
I would also love that. We're actually, I think we might be moving towards starting a C4 as well. So that would be super helpful.
That is a huge trend. This whole like, see, people that started as C4s in the more advocacy space that are starting C3s so that they can more easily go after institutional money. We've got folks that started as C3s that want to start C4s that because they want to have more of a political voice, and on down the road. So I think this is a place where nonprofits are getting much better. And but I think that there aren't a lot of great resources out there for here is the to-dos to do it. New Left Accelerator is a really wonderful shop. If you plug into their trainings and resources, as is Boulder Advocacy, around this kind of multi-entity world, but we can definitely synthesize that from a revenue generation perspective. So Polly, why don't we slate that for September's classes? Would that be cool?
That sounds good.
If I may, sorry,
go ahead, Kirsten.
muted because my son is practicing his viola in the next room.
That's awesome.
So I think that I also believe that this landscape is really shifting, and you know, between working with DAFs and some of these other new elements in the way that the government is requiring us to report, those of us that are small organizations with multifaceted service issues, I think that a deeper dive on any of that would be super helpful for, especially for smaller teams.
Yeah, so Polly, if we can do a reporting piece, Kirsten, that's an excellent call out, because the DAF piece is such a moving target right now with the different legislations that are moving. Same with crypto. So anything that deals in that sort of joint allocation, maybe we do multi-entity and joint allocation and reporting on the money as two halves of that session. Anything else there, guys, that you want to dig into or say, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about and we need more training on that? We welcome that feedback.
And if and like throughout this presentation, if there's something that I feel like I'm taking it for granted that you all understand and you don't, dive in, shut me up. Let's talk about it. Let's take that's why there's not a lot of slides here so that we can have conversations. I actually wanted to also hear like from about how do you feel like you can work in challenges to the system? Where do you see yourself in the local, state, and federal government? Where do you see opportunities to push back or to challenge the system? Or does it feel too scary because it's local, state, and federal government? Or you not even really feel like you can? Yeah.
I think it's a little not scary, but intimidating at sometimes to think like, oh, I could go for a federal government but maybe just knowing that it's a federal government, how do I navigate that and making sure that I have everything that's required? Even it could be a little intimidating.
Yeah, definitely. And then because their systems, they are very, you know, heavy on compliance. So there's like going to be this whole list of things that you have to follow. So then that how to navigate list gets even longer. And then you have to do that gut check of like, can I organizationally and personally manage all the extra weight that taking this funding would impose. The other thing I wanted to say is that, challenging the system doesn't always mean that you have to do it alone. And that's why we wanted to spotlight some groups that you could join, like the independent sector and the Nonprofit Alliance, and there are other nonprofit advocacy groups that do the speaking up for our sector. And I think it's good for us to advocate with those advocacy groups, because they need to hear our progressive voices too. They need to hear our side of the story, and make sure when they're advocating for the sector, they're including our needs. So it makes it a little easier to push back against, the government behemoth, if you do it through an affinity group.
Yeah. Highly recommend plugging into the Nonprofit Alliance. I got to actually be part of a group of nonprofit professionals that advocated to Congress on the Hill for around postal rates and all of the weird picayune things that rock our worlds that nobody thinks about. So there are groups out there, I'm sure, at the state level as well. I know here in Florida, there is a state level group that does that kind of advocacy. So plug in both state level and national groups, because I do think the progressive sector, to Polly's point, is really underrepresented. So all the national groups sort of grew out of kind of a lot more straight up big time direct service and healthcare and agencies and things like that. So both smaller direct service groups, progressive groups are an underrepresented national voice. So if you have any questions about plugging in there, definitely let me know.
So the next channel or ecosystem element is the capitalist market and class system. So we navigate it by creating different giving tiers, but we can navigate that differently by not necessarily connecting it to gift size. We often hire consulting firms to help us get our work done. We don't have all of that talent in-house. We can navigate it our own way by hiring small, independent, BIPOC, women-led, et cetera, firms. So we're not just going to those humongous, brand name mega firms. And the other thing that we can do is to share the wealth. If you're hiring, one of the things that I love about the progressive movement, I've seen this happen a bunch, is somebody, an organization might have the capital to be able to hire a huge firm to do messaging on a survey of different types of content, like issue areas. Sorry, that's what I was thinking of. Then when they get that info, they share it across coalitions and other groups and say, hey, this is what the market is telling us. Use this word instead of this word. Talk about things this way instead of that way. So we all get to benefit from somebody's ability to pay for that data. So be generous with each other.
I think it's not only the data that you pay for, but it's also, so I came from one of those big name evil firms. That's where I spent the last decade of my career, was on the agency side. And share with your colleagues what you are paying for those services. And point blank ask if that agency is doing what we call recycling. So I can tell you that over $10 million of revenue went into my firm because of one deck that I did, because they sold it and sold it and sold it. that is why I'm no longer, one of the many reasons why I am no longer in that kind of business model. But, you know, services at agency get sold at least 60% margin in most cases. So think about that. And that is something that if we push back and we share with each other what we pay for the same services, if we share what's already been created, you know, we undercut an industry's availability or ability to suck us dry. So we have to be part of fighting that. So that is just my agency survivor soapbox.
And I think what a really good point is talk to other people about the same consultants that you use. I had I don't revel in people's hurt feelings, but there was one time that I actually did revel in making someone cry. And it was a shock that it happened, but I was working with a organization that was trying to get a major piece of legislation changed that literally saved and changed the lives of tens of thousands of people. And we were using Direct Mail Firm, who another very huge nonprofit was using. And, you know, we were using them because that, you know, they were considered the gold standard, and that's who the big dog is using, and we swim in this pond, so we should use that group too. And because I was doing my outreach and talking to my colleagues, I basically found out that they were selling to they were giving to us the same stuff that they were selling to them, but like less clean. Like maybe we got the rough draft and they got the final copy. And they were like literally regurgitating the same direct mail letters with like changing out like just slight words. And I called them on it, and they were like, "Oh, let's, you know, we'll do better." And I gave them like a little bit of leash to, you know, to try to change. And then what they did was basically took our press releases and our blog posts and cut and paste them together without any like transitions, and, you know, wanted to charge me a couple $1,000s for that. So I was like, you know what, you know, thanks for having, you know, been our contractor for the last 7 years. I had just started, so not with me, but I'm canceling this $200 and some thousand contract. And I made a grown man cry, and it actually made me happy. Because I didn't need to participate. I didn't need to make their pockets fat. I needed to change the laws that we were trying to change to affect the change that we needed to make. And the only way that I, you know, like my instincts were right, and I did my due diligence and asked around. So there's a little bit more on that later in the discussion, but it's in the same thing. Like the capitalist mindset, the class system of like, if the big fancy organization is doing this, we should be doing it too. Does not, it do it your own way. That's an important thing. And then the other way that we challenge this is to like, we can, you know, fight for change.
Hey guys, did Polly just freeze for me, or is she frozen for everybody? All right.
Froze for everybody.
Let me see what's up with it. Why is it when we freeze
within
we
our
always look
organization?
awesome? Hey Polly, you've frozen for about the last minute. You're back now, it looks like.
I'm plugged into the modem and everything, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
Where did I leave off?
I would say rewind a minute.
Okay. I would say that so the other thing to do is to look at to look at opportunities to make sure that you're working with square dealers by advocating or using vendors or services where people are paid well. Like I found out that one of my print shops was paying terrible wages and not doing and not giving benefits, and you know, I spoke up about it, and I ended the relationship with one place because of that, and I got them to change their ways with another place that I worked at. So sometimes just being this, not sometimes, we know this in our daily life, right? That's how we're agitators and advocates and activists. So we can do that in our professional work too. Do any of you, have any of you had an opportunity to do any of this, or how is this sitting with you?
Or how have you guys navigated hiring, like taking an equity approach to hiring firms? Because I know that's something that has really come up in my world a lot lately, both good and bad for groups that we work with, of how do you hire firms that aren't the big name, have all the services, most of the time white led, et cetera. So just love to have any conversation on that too.
We don't work with a ton of outside firms just because we don't have the like money to do that. But we have like one consulting agency for events, and they do they're like focused on organizations that make change in the LGBTQ space. So definitely wherever we can, we try our best, and like trying to balance funding with like supporting people who look like our organization basically, and who care about the same things we do.
Gotcha, that's helpful. Yeah, I've had groups that, one of the groups that I'm working with was hiring a new digital firm, and they themselves are a very white staffed organization in the democracy space, and they were kind of using their agency picks to balance out their own lack of internal diversity. And I think that is the wrong way to do it, because all change happens at home first, right? So I think that that's the other thing you have to be careful of in this space when you are trying to, navigate capitalism and classism and racism and all those things by doing the check mark. So I think that's one thing that I see a lot of happening right now. So.
Yeah, real change doesn't happen with checking boxes.
All right.
All right. So the big beast in philanthropy, of course, is the foundation world, and I think that this is one where it gets a little bit trickier, right? Because not a lot of, you can choose to not go for government funding. I know some organizations that don't do any foundation work, but that's not the average I've seen. So how do you work with, how do you take foundation money without participating in the nonprofit industrial complex or upholding it? Well, we can look for funders who are embodying our values when we can. And I understand like that can be hard. Like if you have a funder that gives you a big grant, having a gut check and a conversation about like, do we want to still keep taking money from this funder, is a conversation that you have to have carefully, planfully, with your budget in mind, and a serious workaround. It's not something that you want to do capriciously, but you can do it. If you can, don't work with funders that make you jump through unnecessary hoops. Don't sell yourself short, essentially. Like it's you and your organization have value to them, and it's a difficult thing, I think, sometimes as fundraisers to not fall into the benevolence sort of trap of like being just so grateful that we almost, will eat a turd sandwich I mean, I feel like a bunch of my career, I did a lot of like, very humbly, gratefully accepting inappropriate words, comments, actions. And I don't now, and because I can. And so it's also, it's a point of privilege, but when I can, I push back, and talk truth to power when I can. It's hard.
Guys, let's talk about this. So I'm a funding intermediary, but at the end of the day, I'm a funder. I have grant award power. What do you need me to advocate with my colleagues in philanthropy so that this isn't part of the industrial complex that you're fighting against? What are the things that you feel like foundations are doing or funding intermediaries do that aren't mission aligned?
I would, I'd love to jump in here. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
necessarily not mission aligned, but more just like the unnecessary hoops. So when I read this, don't work with funders that make you jump through unnecessary. Which funders don't make you jump through unnecessary hoops? Or, I mean, from my perspective, what's unnecessary versus from theirs, right? Like, even again, like, on decision day, all well-intended funders reaching out, but then, saying like, how can we support you? Well, just give us a lot of GOS money, just call it a day, like, or funders issuing, responses to the decision and say like, okay, we'll give you, here, apply for this funding due like August 1st, like 10 of them now. And like, it's up to $15,000. You can't spend more than 20% of it on staff. You have to hire a consultant. You have to tell us what your long-term plans are. Like, I mean.
So I will put out, go ahead, Anjali, sorry.
No, if you want to help, like, put out the money, like put out the RFP and make it vague and let us decide if we should just give staff paid time off to respond, like, I don't know. That's what I would, I have a lot to say on the topic, but I'll stop here.
No, and I appreciate the candor, and I will put this offer out to any of our Fundraising Friday partners. If you get RFPs like that, call me. I'm happy to call a funder and say, hey, we have partners, and I won't name names, but this application is ridiculous. And this is how much time it takes. Because one of the interesting things about being an intermediary is I too have to fill out all of our grant applications with Andrea on the phone, who does all of our budget stuff, and Lisa, our development director. So if you need an advocate in the philanthropy space to say, stop being an idiot in the paperwork you're asking for, because it's not part of your decision process, it's just a CYA process, call me. I am happy to have those conversations, because that's part of my ethical responsibility to the sector. And I've actually, for the funders that, like, I have started asking, why do you need this? Because it will take me this many hours to compile. I am happy to do it if it is part of your decision-making process. But I've started quantifying, like, I cost my organization this many dollars. And if you need me to do this, it's going to be a full business day of writing. I am happy to do that. Is it worth the X amount of money for that investment? Because I'm not free to Progressive Multiplier. Neither is Polly, neither is Andrea. And I don't think funders are great at thinking of what they cost an organization in staff time that could be put otherwise. So, like, this is an evolving thing for us as well. So we've really skinnied down our stuff to a Google form, and we make a lot of stuff optional. Like, we'll need it eventually to help you with your project, but we don't need it upfront in the application. So we ask, and we're really lucky that we have grantees that are like, this was a ridiculous thing to ask, you should take that out. But we've also done a lot to foster that kind of relationship. So I think it's also on us to say, tell me where this question that I'm going to spend 8 hours researching and answering fits into your decision-making process, because I need to make the decision if I'm going to put that time in and apply. And as I say, happy to talk to any funder about unethical application practices. Nobody got time for that.
The other, the other place where I usually see it is like, you got the award, yay, and then you get the terms and conditions. And then you find out that there's like a huge quantity of reporting and a huge quantity of things that you did not know were going to be attached to this grant. And that's where you're like, ugh. Well, I got gutsy one day and just pushed back and was like, I went to my program officer and I was like, you're killing me here. And we had a great conversation, and it was sort of a eureka moment for me to be like, oh, they hate it too. They didn't come up with the reporting requirement. Somebody and 3 levels in the hierarchy above them did, with some committee, when they created the database that they have to put the stuff in, and they never look at it. And I literally worked with that program officer to create like workarounds. So instead of doing this giant reporting thing, I can literally put in like a couple of bullet points that triggered that I completed the task, or that I would just file the same report every month and only do a new report on the quarter. I negotiated a better deal for myself with my program officers, because the program officer is human too. And that was like the biggest eureka moment for me. And I don't know what happened that day. I don't know if I just, was caffeine overloaded, that I just was gutsy enough to say something, but I did. So I would say, when you have that moment of gumption, take it, because it could wind up really benefiting you. The other thing that I started to do was exactly what Bethany said, was to literally quantify how much time it would take to get that information. Or I would offer alternative information and say, I can give you this in this amount of time. Would that meet your needs? Otherwise, I'm going to have to spend 2 days on it. And they'll be like, oh, no, we didn't mean for it to be a big lift. We just thought this was something you would already have. And the number of things that foundations have told me they thought I just had at my fingertips was incredible. But it's because they sort of don't know. So they just ask.
Yeah. That's a really good one, Polly. That happened to me recently when the funder, being a lovely partner and really into the work, was like, oh, just make the report short, and here are these 5 questions you need to answer. And I said, happy to answer these 5. This is going to end up being a 5,000 word, 16-hour write for me to edit, to write and edit. And she was like, oh my gosh, are you serious? She's like, I was thinking this was like an email with bullets. And I'm like, no, because it's 4 grantees and you want me to update you on each one of their projects and do their trajectory model and all of those things. So I do think that there is a mismatch between, we think you have these things and you don't have these things on the reporting side. On the application side, same, like Andrea and I deal with this a lot of, give us your budget model or your 5-year trajectory growth plan or things like that. It's like, we're 4 years old. We don't have that shit. So definitely have those candid conversations. And if you ever need advice, backup, etc., we are here for that.
And of course, the salve to this is to have independent revenue generation that fortifies your budget so that you can begin to make decisions about what funders you want to play with or not. The more diverse your income, the more independent revenue you have, you'll know your return on investment of time with your independent revenue generation. You'll know how much time it takes to do digital fundraising, what's your return on investment, how much time. Then you can start extrapolating and be like, well, if it's going to take me X amount of hours to write this proposal and X amount of time for all of the reporting and all of the people that we have to come together, you can do a back of the envelope scribble and decide, well, going for that $15,000 grant is just, with that organization, with that foundation, who's like really high maintenance, is not worth our organizational time. all of those hours are better spent working our donor list, getting our attrition down, getting our retention up, doing all these other things. We'll have a better bang for a buck, and it aligns with our mission of growing our base. But you can only do that if you start, if you have that diversified income and you can start doing those REIs, ROIs, and know that information. All right, element number 4. So the nonprofit direct service through direct action organization. We created this beast. The nonprofit industrial complex exists because we exist, and we, I think sometimes purposefully and sometimes by accident, created all these things that we hate. The donor is hero, all the, the way that we live in scarcity, I'm fumbling over my own words because my brain's moving too fast, but just, we have to do the navel gazing to know what our role is in this. So I think it's important that as fundraisers, we understand what the nonprofit industrial complex is, but we also need to educate our Boston colleagues, because I have been in organizations where, everyone else did the good work of the organization and we did the gross stuff because we dealt with, donors and funders, and all we care about is money and not actually like changing the world or helping people, which, as you all know, couldn't be further from the truth. We do what we do every day because we love our vision, missions, and values of our organizations. So educating up and across our organization, I think, is a really good step in disrupting it. And so that it's that the fundraising office in particular isn't called, a part of the nonprofit industrial complex, but actually a disruptor of it. Another way that we can do it differently is by making sure that we're working on our storytelling and our messaging. We had, presentations on this already where we talked about not participating in trauma porn and putting people down to, and to raise money because we know it sells, like we don't have to put the donor as the hero. And the other thing that we need to do is to really look at our part of the sector and say, it doesn't need to continue to be a white middle-aged profession. When I first went into fundraising, I worked at a huge nonprofit organization, and I was told by the vice president that I didn't look right for a fundraiser because I was fat and I was swarthy, meaning I wasn't WASP enough. I mean, it was very New England type of folks like in the organization. And I was, so I was basically
I didn't
told,
have a face for major donor work. Direct quote. So yes.
And our profession has largely stayed the same. Many years ago, I participated with the Chronicle of Philanthropy in a set of articles around the sexual harassment in the nonprofit sector, in the fundraising world, and I talked about almost there needing to be a discussion about the sexual politics of fundraising, because so often as fundraisers, when we're doing one-on-one in the nonprofit industrial complex, when you're meeting with these big fancy donors, it's often young women in situations where there's alcohol, in a room with typically a white man who has power and money and thinks that means something. And we have come a long way, baby, since that article came out, but we still have a long way to go. And I think that we have to do that by looking at making sure that we don't have our implicit biases and any other weird, you don't have a face for major gifts thing in our head that keeps our sector this way. I'm going to make an assumption that that's not anyone in this room. We're all different, but we need to just make sure that we guard against it. And, you know, one of the ways to do it also is to like, I think it's really important to build talent within the organization. I sort of live by the mantra, you never know where a good idea comes from. And I'm always willing to talk to anyone in any part of my organizations about fundraising. And I've often taken in interns from other areas, completely different areas of the organization, to help them learn and teach them up on fundraising, either because they wanted to do it for their Cub Scout troop or their church, or they wanted to, you know, be a peer-to-peer fundraiser for our own organization. But I think it's important to, for lack of a better term, like evangelize our profession. One, it is a profession. There's skill, there's discipline, there's art and science behind it. But part of like teaching everyone about it, our colleagues about it, demystifying it and making it more accessible will also make it more successful. How are you all dealing with how your organization lives in this space or doesn't live in this space, or how do you want to change it if you need to change something in your organization around this? Is anybody not, are folks not really feeling this one?
This is one of the #1 requests we get in one-on-one sessions is how do I get everybody up the chain for me to understand how what we're doing in fundraising perpetuates bad behavior. It perpetuates like white saviorism, or it perpetuates trauma porn, or it perpetuates siloing, where we look at mission and what makes the mission go separately, or we aren't making a push to do the hard thing of internally, like the bandwidth to hire BIPOC professionals who in general have less fundraising experience, because that has not been a profession available to young professionals of color. That like, how do we create our programs so that we are actually giving folks who have less experience a path, so that we are actually diversifying from within. So I would say that is one of our #1 topic for one-on-one coaching. So I know that it's happening. But maybe, go ahead, Camille.
Sorry, I was, sorry, finish your thought.
No, go.
Well, we unionized, so that's been helpful. Awesome. Which is great. Yeah, that's been really helpful in communicating things. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had several of our grantee partners that have gone through that process lately, and it's been fascinating how that sort of changes the conversation so drastically when it comes to behaviors. So I love it.
But it's interesting because our organization is so focused on, there's unfortunately like a disconnect, which I think is the case in a lot of places and why we're having these conversations, right? There's such a big disconnect between our mission and the population that we serve, and even like what our organization looks like and who is hired and who works there, and like pay equity and, you know, like all of those things. And it's so disheartening to see that. But that is like, you know, unionizing has been super helpful, trying to be more transparent with leadership about the fact that we notice that and we see that and it's not okay. But yeah, there's a big kind of disconnect there that we're definitely kind of figuring out how to work through.
Yeah, and I think, the more transparent you can be in sort of what does the flailing and stumbling and figuring it out look like is so important for the industry to have people that are willing to sort of live the ugly parts out loud. I think that's so critical right now because like we're going through our own DEI work internally here, we're a small team of 5, but we're now operating outside of a management company for the first time in our existence. This is what day 5 on our own. So we're really taking a hard look at what does it mean to build equity into hiring, onboarding, orientation, all of those policies that we've looked at, like why do people have to wait multiple years to be fully vested in their 401k, or making our pay bands transparent to all our teammates, or whatever it might be. And it's just, I think that there is a lot of that, like we're not doing it flawlessly, but I think we're doing it authentically, and we're happy to share the good, bad, and ugly. And one of the things that we, having had to hire it, we were a 2-person or a 1-person team a year ago. Now we're a 5-person team. In hiring, navigating hiring for diversity and hiring for skill set, and when those didn't always match up, and what do we do, and how do we create equitable paths to thriving within an organization, and having that really candid and hard conversation about like, yes, I can't find in the current job market somebody that is a candidate that is not middle-aged white, like most 30-year fundraisers look like Pollyanna. In my career, I think I have had one Black colleague of my age who was a fundraiser and had similar experience. And to support our grantees, it takes that kind of experience. So how do we navigate that? And what do we need to do with the training that we invest in internally? So there have been some really sticky and hard conversations with our board and internally. So if any of you are going through those kinds of evolutions, reach out. We're happy to talk.
Yeah, this stuff isn't easy, and having the conversations publicly are really important, and even just conversations about fundraising publicly is important. I think breaking down the silos in an organization is how you flatten hierarchy. So if people feel like they understand what's going on, they might not be able to do it, but it's not some big secret, then it helps lift it helps lift folks up. It helps push the top down. It's all good things. Anybody else have thoughts or insights about this?
I have a question, just because the word diversity in DEI work is so imperative right now, and it's but I do think it's interesting how I also find that people get a little bit hung up right now on the visual facets of diversity, and not talking about the neurodiverse and the physically diverse, and as an older person myself, sometimes there's a level of, I do recognize in the nonprofit development sector there are a lot of older folks, but I, for the first time in my life, am the oldest person at my organization, so that's been a trip for me. There's no old white guys to get upset with, but oh wait, those are the ones who write the checks. But I do think that there's an import to integrating a more holistic sense of what we're talking about when we look at DEI, and having it be another one of those difficult facets of the conversation that absolutely needs to happen. As a queer person, as a mixed race person who presents white, like there's a bunch of that I think is is really important to also bring to the table, and to educate really well-intentioned folks to not get too hung up on these limited silos, while we also do that important work to hire people that are different than us, and even people with accents. We recently hired someone who has an accent, and I've always worked with people with accents, and I found myself communicating with my coworkers about, you know, let's pause for a second. Do we recognize that maybe potentially the way that we're using language is just slightly different because of this, you know, English being someone's second language? Diversity has a really broad umbrella that I'm hopeful as we move forward. Everyone talks about all of those facets of it.
Yeah. Kirsten, I'm so glad you brought this up. I had to fill out a board diversity form for one of our big funders the other day that they update every year. And it was, there was the racial piece, the gender piece, and they added a question this year of how many of your board members self-identify as disabled. And I was so taken aback by that in both good and bad ways. It's like, do you really want me to call my board members and ask them, you know, like, hey, are you disabled? And as somebody who is the spouse of someone with an invisible disability, as you guys know, my husband has an acquired brain injury. I'm like, yeah, no, that feels gross. But I was encouraged at the same time of not just doing the I can see it checkbox. Now, do I think there needs to be some evolution in like, how do we discuss the, you know, invisible elements of diversity? And I would love to figure out how to do that well, because when I, you know, get all of these things from our funders about like, how many people of each of these colors do you have? How many genders do you have? How many, you know, and it's, I'm like, you're missing the point, because when I look at our little team of 5, like, yes, we are Nicaraguan, Venezuelan, Korean, Black, white, but that is just like such the surface level of our diversity in terms of neurodiversity and, you know, like everything else that we have encapsulated in the 5 women who make up this organization. And I think we need to start pushing back about, and coming up with the solution of how do we make it not turning it into a quant study, but how do we make it into an inquiry into what should diversity mean within an organization? So I'd love to open up the floor for that, because it's certainly something that as the filler out of foundation applications, I am befuddled. So.
I had a conversation with a former colleague I worked with at Open Society Foundation for about a year and a half, a couple years back, and another former colleague from there who's moved on to another foundation and I were talking, and he was telling me that they're going through the shift of funding only BIPOC-led organizations, and he himself is a cis Black male, and he and you know, it was a really good conversation, but I pushed and I asked him, well, how did he feel about it? Because he was he had a look on his face that made it sort of seem like he was skeptical. And then I asked him, what is your definition of leadership? And do you have a, you know, like heteropatriarchal white supremacist definition of what leadership means? And he just sort of sat back in his chair, and it was just like, I hadn't even thought to push that button, to think about it in that way. And this was a while ago, and he recently got in touch with me to say that he asked that question in a staff meeting with the other program officers and his boss, and they had a really interesting conversation. It didn't change anything, but they had a conversation. And change takes time, but you know, I think to me, it would be great if I would love there to be more BIPOC-led organizations getting a lot more money, but I also think that we need to think about leadership in a lot of different ways, because change does take time. So do we want, you know, our foundation's going to just start demanding that the leadership of all of these organizations must quit so that they can, there can be leadership changes so that it can reflect, organizations can reflect differently. You know, that's clearly not going to happen. So maybe we need to look at things a little differently. But those are tough conversations.
Is there anything training wise that would be helpful here? I know there was a lot of interest in some of the more like, how do we navigate the ins and outs of the government piece of the complex, but is there training that would be useful here?
I am wondering if it's a subset of work that we could all maybe contribute on a document to, like how we are looking at it, and also just maybe a conversation, because I'd love to learn more and do more and not make assumptions myself.
Kirsten, I love that idea. It doesn't feel like a training because I don't think there's necessarily an answer yet. Like, do it this way. Because I have found, like, even in the research Andrea and I have done on how to do this better and paths for, like, equitable paths for thriving in an organization and all the things, we've come up woefully short in our research. So I don't know that it's out there. So I think, you know, Polly, let's figure out if we want to take one of the months for Fundraising Friday. And Michaela, totally hear you. That, you know, can we do, like, instead of lecture, can we do work sessions and do a, you know, Fundraising Friday cohort co-authored, you know, document on what do we as nonprofits need to do, you know, to dismantle the complex? What's our part in this? Where we are the part of the problem. I think that would be useful.
I think that would be awesome, and something that, I mean, there's so many people. If you Google this, you'll see lots of like workshops on it, but I don't think anybody. I haven't really fully been satisfied with things that I've read, and it would be awesome if we put all of our brains together and come up with something that helps answer some of these questions, especially the navigate. How do we navigate and challenge it, and our responsibilities in it? How to look at it differently. Love it.
All right, you're in charge of coordinating, my friend.
Doing a work session does mean that we'd be asking for your labor. So I'll be reaching out.
And we are always really conscious of compensating the groups that we work with for their labor, whether it is often a donation to the organizations that they represent. But I think this could be a really cool piece to co-author and lift up to, like, I'm on the editorial board at the Nonprofit Times. And I think that like, they'd love to do a piece like this. So we can certainly, like, as I say, put everybody on our byline, and I think this would be very cool.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I want to move on to the final element. There we go. If it let me, we've touched already on it a bit, but it's the in the discussion about the business world that supports all of these elements, and we've also touched on some of the ways to navigate and challenge it too. So you know, like I talked about with my example of the big fancy firm, you know, pushing back against using those types of organizations, and trusting the talent internally. You don't always, just because, you know, so often I've seen the board would be like, oh, it'd be really great if we got a consultant to do X, without even considering, like, do we have the experience and the talent on staff to do it? Or is this information gettable that we could still do it internally with just a little bit of training and work? the example about unionizing, making sure we're paying living wages to workers in our organizations, but also the consultants that we work with. I remember early in my career bristling when I would work with organizations that were like, oh, we only use union print shops. And I'd be like, oh, that's going to make my budget skyrocket, because I wasn't thinking right. But thinking, you know, like this is about a brain shift. This is about like, how do we do right throughout our, you know, how do we walk the walk, talk when we talk the talk. And that means, you know, paying more so that people are not exploited down the chain from what we're working on. I have a really great example about making a mission specific demand. So I worked with the Disability Rights Organization for 1 million years. We had an annual conference that brought in 600 to 800 disability rights advocates from around the country. And we worked with Marriott Hotel in this one city. We had a long-term contract. We went there every year. And, you know, the ADA is pretty specific when it comes to building accommodations. They have to have a certain number of everything. And when we were when we were negotiating with them about whether or not we were going to sign another long-term contract, we did as much as we could to get the pricing down, to get all of the bells and whistles that we wanted in the contract that we could. But at the very last minute, we said, you know what would really make us sign this long-term contract is if you went over the ADA minimum requirement for a number of accessible hotel rooms. And there's 2 types of accessible rooms, fully accessible and mostly accessible. We had a conversation and they were like, all right, we asked them for 12 rooms for them to add to the hotel by the time our next conference happened. And by the time our next conference happened, no, we asked for 10. By the time our next conference happened, we got 13. So they increased the number of accessible rooms in their hotel. Now, it was a win-win for us. It was a great win for us because that meant, you know, we didn't have to like play a weird lottery game of who got the number. Everyone, like almost everyone in our conference had a disability. So those rooms got, you know, pulled up quick. It meant there was way more of them. So there, you know, it made it easier to house folks during the conference, but it also became a bragging point for them. They got to say, they actually started marketing to other disability organizations and let those other groups know that they had more accessible rooms, the most accessible, the highest number of accessible rooms in the city. So that mission specific demand didn't benefit us financially, but it had a ripple effect that was really exciting. Another way that you can push back with the businesses that you work with is to, you know, if you're working with a firm and that firm does not have a staff that looks like your organization, insist on the team that you work with look like your organization, insist on working with a diverse team. And also make sure they're being really transparent with their pricing and their accountability, and really hold consultants accountable. Does that all make sense? So how do you all work with business? How do you all work with in the business world in this way? How have you struggled in this capacity in any way? Sorry, I saw a couple of head nods, but not hearing anything. I tend to think that the business component of the nonprofit industrial complex is the one that gets a little bit of the shortest shrift, and that's why we wanted to make sure to give it a look. Because those are the consultants that we hire, the people that we work with are typically the ones who are going to make the suggestions like participating in trauma porn because it's the thing that's going to get your highest rate of return. They want their numbers to look good. They want to be able to brag to other people and say, look how successful we were. Look how much money we raised for this organization. So they're going to be the ones that are going to push you or really encourage you to do things that are just not in alignment with this disruptive way of thinking. So it's really important to push back, to say, look, I know that is what sells. We're not going to sell pain anymore.
Yeah, and I think this point is largely about how and why do you contract with businesses that, yes, support, but also leech off of nonprofits and perpetuate some of the toxicity in our sector. So don't ever sign a contract where you don't have actual cost and margin laid out specifically. So if your consultant is charging you $185 an hour, that consultant is not making $185 an hour unless they're independent. So it's how much is salary, how much is overhead. You deserve to see that. Make sure that, you are not hiring consultants because, your board or your ED will take it better from somebody who's not you. Reach out to folks like us, like, your peers. You guys have heard me say it's hard to be a prophet in your own land, but there's an entire gross business sector about, that we hire to be the prophets, and we know better. So let's get creative about not enabling that behavior anymore. Or are there small indie consultants that can serve that purpose, that are also nonprofits, like, Atlas Center for Nonprofits is a nonprofit consultant, or the Capacity Shop, or any of those folks that are actually nonprofit technical assistance partners. There are lots of us out there. So think about the way you shop for vendors and support differently, would be what I would say. And there was one other thing. That's it. I got to go be an aunt now. So I apologize for bailing a little early.
Thanks, Bethany.
Thanks, guys.
We are near the end of the conversation. I wanted to hear from you all to see if there's stuff that you wanted to talk about. Like, how do you think you're going to navigate or challenge the nonprofit industrial complex? Does it feel safe in your organization or in your role to start saying some stuff or doing some stuff out loud? What rubbed you the wrong way? What do you think I got totally, absolutely, unequivocally wrong? Or what do you think we should be drilling down on a little bit more? And I trust, my wife tells me I'm wrong all the time. It won't hurt my feelings. Are there ways in which you guys are going to incorporate any of this stuff, do you think? You guys ready for the day to be done?
My day's just starting here in California. I think it's a lot of food for thought. Violetta, thank you for putting up that article, those 2 articles. And I do like the concept of us, like this being an ongoing conversation. I would like to know if other folks do too, because it's helpful for me. I work in an interesting in-between zone. We're in education and environmental, and then also a little small museum with a very robust but tiny team. So doing what's right because it's right, and working with aligned organizations, even so far as our printers, like we're constantly trying to find ways that are affordable, that facilitate development, that stay aligned with our mission, vision, and values towards, equity and justice and the environment. I can only imagine what some of the other folks are grappling with right now. So I'd love to have an ongoing conversation about these pieces.
You know, thanks for saying that. I have for a really long time bristled whenever I heard people talk about the nonprofit industrial complex, because I always took it personally, because it was always like thrown around about fundraising, that fundraising was the worst thing that ever happened to nonprofits. And, you know, it was like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm not a bad person. And it was, I think the process of sort of like doing this deep dive and really thinking about it and also thinking about it over the years has been helpful to me, because I do think that there is a public dialogue that is happening, I think, you know, especially among my progressive friends about this, that I think misses the mark. And we have an opportunity to have that conversation and be like, this is a bigger thing, and we all have a part in making and changing it. I like, and I really do go back to that original slide of the original presentation with Prometheus, and that, you know, like, philanthropy is bigger and longer and greater than the industrial complex that we've created around it, and we can give the people the fire to do to do big things and create big change. And I think that if we get back to that sort of purpose and we do it our way, in our disruptive, advocating, organizing, troublemaking way, I think that we can have much more equitable, much more equitable nonprofit sector. So I very much look forward to working with anyone who wants to work with us on that project. I'll definitely be following up in the coming weeks with our agendas, our training session agendas for the rest of the year, and also this project. So if anyone has anything else they want to jump in with, happy to hear it. Otherwise, I'll give you 3 whole minutes back. All right, y'all. Well, take care. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your attention and how much you all participated. It made it my nervous little soul happy. Take care.
Thank you, Polly.